Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has informed the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres of the South African government's decision to withdraw its contribution of soldiers to the United Nations Organization Stabilisation mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo. South Africa ranks amongst the top 10 troop contributing countries to MONUSCO, with a force presence of over 700 soldiers deployed in the Democratic Republic of Congo in support of the mission's peacekeeping mandate.
In a telephone conversation held earlier in January this year, President Ramaphosa indicated that South Africa's unilateral withdrawal decision from MONUSCO is influenced by the need to consolidate and realign the resources of the South African National Defence Force, following 27 years of South Africa's support to UN peacekeeping efforts in the DRC.
At the back of that, let's bring you this conversation now. We are joined by the former Chief of Staff at DIRCO and now Security Specialist, Dr. Kingsley Makhubula. Thank you so much for your time, Doc. Great to chat. So South Africa has decided to withdraw its troops. And, just from a security perspective, let's just hear from you of how significant this decision is, particularly when we look at both the mission as well as South Africa's role in peacekeeping.
Good morning, Dolly. Just a small correction. I was never Chief of Staff at DIRCO. I was Chief of State Protocol, amongst others. But, the unilateral decision to withdraw South African troops in the DRC, it's something that caught a lot of us by surprise, because the mission that they were sent to fulfill, it's not yet accomplished. That's one. And this comes at the back of casualties that South Africa suffered during the SADC mission. So the question is, was the sacrifice worth it? We've lost some troops in the DRC. So the question that we'll be asking ourselves, many of us moving forward. But Goli, it comes at the backdrop of what we've seen when the peace agreement was signed in Washington sometimes last year. But the Trump administration made it quite clear that they are unlikely to agree for the renewal of this mission. So I don't know when that mission is coming to an end. But also, there are a lot of developments that have taken place. The Americans have made it quite clear now that they are not going to support a lot of peace. The peace commission within the UN system is being undermined by the board of peace that the Americans have set up. So there are a lot of things that are happening that may have informed South Africa to take it before it's too late. If the United States does not support the renewal of the mission in the DRC, may really lead into serious financial chaos. We're seeing financial constraints within the UN system, giving a lack of contribution by the United States in a lot of UN bodies.
Yeah, Doc, and given that, South Africa is among the top 10 troop contributing countries, just what immediate operational gap does this withdrawal now bring about on the ground?
It's only a lot of tension. 2 days ago, President Kagame of Rwanda really came up with a very hard-hitting statement that is directed at the U.S. administration. It's part of the signature of that Washington Accord. And you can see the tension is building up. So you are likely to see the flaring up of tension in the DRC. You are likely to see more suffering in the DRC. I don't know how is the United Nations going to close this gap when the South African troops withdraw. Other countries may come in, but the funding will be a huge challenge. The US, it's unlikely to fund and agree for further funding. Remember, these are assessed contribution within the United Nations. So the United States is unlikely to do that, more so that they've made it quite clear that they have no intention to renew some of this peace mission. This is not the only one. The peace mission in Mali was defunded, and eventually the United Nations Security Council decided not to renew that mission. So you are likely to see a pattern of not supporting this peace mission, particularly within the African continent, which is where you're seeing a lot of concentration or civil wars that are taking place.
And there has been much speculation around this particular withdrawal, Doc. And just to what extent does this decision also somewhat, reflect the growing frustration with the mission's limited success in stabilizing the DRC?
I've always maintained, Oli, that the DRC solution is a political one, that you would not see a military solution to the conflict in the DRC. But really, I hope South Africa, even though it has taken a unilateral decision, because the DRC is part of the SADC, it's part of the East African community, that South Africa would have consulted other role players. We would, as a country, find it very difficult to act on our own and become really isolated, particularly on issues that have to do with the continent. Now that even our foreign policy, it's really focusing on the African solution for African problems. So if you start to see this withdrawal, a unilateral withdrawal, as it is stated, it raises a lot of questions for me. But I only hope that South Africa has done detailed consultations within the SADC to explain its position. And I can understand the frustration of South Africa, because you're finding parallel processes that are taking place in the DRC to resolve the problem there. And yet there's no consultations with major countries like South Africa that are contributing troops there. That actually we have our men and women putting their lives on the line to really try to preserve whatever remains of the DRC territorial integrity. And if this is happening without consultation, South Africa would be within its powers to unilaterally withdraw. But I hope that it has done detailed consultation and reflected in terms of the long-term projection of having this conflict in the DRC, the implications it would have on the SADC area, and particularly the question of the humanitarian disaster that is likely to build up, given what I had also President Kagame saying, really describing how these major countries can go somewhere if they think that Rwanda would continue to compromise its national security.
And I like that you make mention of a long-term sort of a projection, Doc. Just, what message does this send now to the United Nations as well as other troop-contributing countries about the future of peacekeeping missions? I ask this because I'm trying to find out could this decision perhaps also encourage other countries to reassess or reduce their own contributions to MONUSCO?
Well, the MONUSCO mission, Koli, when it comes to an end, countries would have to withdraw because there won't be any funding for troop contributing countries. There won't be any funding for the mission. So the mission will die a natural death without a renewal by the Security Council. And it only takes one country within the Security Council to decide we're not renewing the mission for it not to happen. So as it is now, it's quite possible that this mission won't be renewed and these countries would withdraw. The question then remains, what would happen to the plight of ordinary people in the DRC? Not only in the DRC, in the whole of the East African area. It would have serious diffusional impact in countries like Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, Zambia. All the neighboring countries within the DRC would have really be affected by any possible flaring up of the civil war, particularly without any presence of peacekeeping in that country.
And I like that you also just delved onto that, sort of forward-thinking sort of outlook, Doc. And if South Africa is stepping back at this moment, just what other alternative forms of engagement could it pursue to support stability in the DRC, whether it's diplomatic, whether it's logistical, or whether regional security mechanisms, or whatever the case may be?
Tori, one of the biggest problems is what we are seeing coming out of Washington. This transactional approach to peacekeeping, that you give us these resources in support of any peace effort and so on. It's quite problematic. When they signed the Washington Accord, it was quite clear it was very superficial. They did not deal into the details that are related to intractable conflict and certain nuances that are built in the process of this conflict and how to attend to those issues. But as long as, Toli, the international supply chain of critical mineral is not affected, you're unlikely to see an outcry. And because there's an illicit business that is going on from the resources of the DRC and the supply chain globally, particularly of minerals such as coltan, are not affected, the international community is going to look the other way around. As soon as they start getting affected, you may hear a lot of voices coming from particularly the developed countries, because the supply chain is what is fundamental to them. Sometimes only at the expense of ordinary lives of people. I mean, poverty that is going to hit the DRC with the total collapse, not even the withdrawal, total collapse of MONUSCO mission in the DRC is going to have ripple effect for many years to come.
Sure. And before I let you go, Doc, let's just hear about the withdrawal itself. You know, just what safeguards should be put in place to ensure that this withdrawal happens in a safe manner, you know, safe and orderly manner, and does not endanger civilians or the remaining peacekeepers.
Well, the challenge then is up to the command structure of the UN now. As the South African contingency withdraws, how are they going to secure areas that the South Africans were really responsible for? It's going to be a huge challenge. As I'm saying, the resource is a huge issue. The question of military equipment for this peacekeeping mission, it's a huge issue. Most of the countries that are contributing there, they don't even have funds to keep on running this mission, because the manner in which this happens, Polly, is that individual countries would use their own resources and later on claim from the United Nations. But if you get countries without resources committing to participate there, you're going to have a huge challenge. So the challenge is quite huge. In the past, developed countries have cushioned some of these countries that are contributing until they get their rebates from the United Nations system.
I must thank you so much for your time and insights on the program there. That's security specialist Dr. Kingsley Makhubula joining us there. Thanks so much indeed for your time on the program.